Good morning. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Architectural Review Board of the City of Palo Alto for July 18th, 2019. Would you please call the roll?
Yes, good morning. We've got the names wrong. Peter and Wynn, you have been switched.
All right, thank you.
I think everyone else is fine. There we go. So Chair Firth.
Here.
Vice Chair Balte.
Present.
Board Member Liu.
Present.
Board Member Thompson.
Present.
And Board Member Hirsch. Okay, all present. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The first item on our agenda, as always, is oral communications. This is the time for anybody who wishes to do so to speak to the board on a matter not on today's agenda. Do we have any speaker cards for this item? We have no speaker cards. Seeing no volunteers, we'll go on. Staff, are there any agenda changes, additions, or deletions?
No changes.
Thank you. City official reports.
Yes. So we have, actually we'll take Board Member Thompson. We weren't sure if you were going to be here, so we had you as absent. We'll fix that on the agenda because you are here. Thank you.
I almost wasn't here, so it's fair.
Yes, after a late flight, so we appreciate that. Or an early flight, really, right? As far as future agenda items, we will be hearing the 702 Clara Drive, which is a 3-unit project. And the 788 San Antonio has been moved off to the next hearing. And then 486 Hamilton is a prelim that we'll hear. And then there is a subcommittee for 3265 El Camino. And that'll be on August 1st.
So I guess I have one question. Has the council appointed a new ARB member to replace me?
Unfortunately not. So we are going to be, given this is your last meeting, and we'll do a little something at the end, we will be a 4-member board for a little bit until council comes back from recess and is able to do the interviews and take a vote.
Recent project decisions. Alex, you went to represent the board before the city council on the Mercedes-Benz project. Could you report to us on that?
Sure. So this is, let me get the address. So this is in June. So on June 24th for 1730 Embarcadero Road, which is the Mercedes and Audi dealers, the City Council approved the project on an 8-1 vote. The outstanding items that the board had identified will come back as a separate project. So we'll only be reviewing that as a new, just those items as a new project. And so, so generally they supported the project.
So just to be clear, we did not recommend approval. We continued it. They elected, the staff and city council elected instead to review the project. They looked at it and said the open items that were still concerning us, they would send back to us as a separate, more focused.
Right, but the project is approved.
But the project itself is approved.
Yes.
Okay. Anything more from staff on that?
So just the massing of the building, the zone change, those sorts of things are what's approved. And then, as Alex said, the details that you wanted to still review will come back to you.
So they've made it clear that this is a project that they want in this location, in this general form.
In the general form, yes.
Thank you. Anything else on that before we go on? Thank you, Alex, for being there and reporting to them and from them. I believe that takes us to our first action item, which is a public hearing. It's quasi-judicial. It concerns 565 Hamilton Avenue. It's a recommendation on the applicant's request for approval of a major architectural review to allow the demolition of existing structures and the construction of a mixed-use building with 19 rental apartments and up to 7,500 square feet of office space. 3 existing parcels would be merged. A variance has been requested to allow protrusion of the roof eaves, a fin wall, and the first floor canopy into the Hamilton Avenue special setback. There's been an environmental assessment finding that this particular project is categorically exempt from the provisions of CEQA. Basically infill housing, is that right?
Yes.
Yes. And Sheldon, I forgot to make a note of who the applicant is.
The applicant is Brandy Bridges.
Thank you. So, my first question of my fellow board members is, has everybody seen the site?
Yeah.
Yes, I visited the site.
Yes.
Not since the last hearing.
Right, but everybody, we're all familiar with the site. We have inspected it, some of us more recently than others. And my next question is, does anybody have any conversations or other research to report that pertain to what we're hearing today?
No.
Nobody does. Okay, thank you. Well, having established that, could we hear the staff report, please?
Yes, thank you. I'm Sheldon Ossing, consultant planner. The applicant is also here with their presentation. And just to start off, I understand, Madam Chair, this is your last meeting with us, and I just wanted to thank you for your guidance and levity on the issues, and you're going to be missed. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this project is at the corner of Hamilton Avenue and Webster Street. It's an area of transition from the commercial area to the residential area. What's proposed are 19 rental dwelling units and about 7,500 square feet of office space. The site does include right now 3 properties in 2 different zoning districts. The properties will be merged. The office component will be confined to the CD portion, while the residential units will be on all levels of the site. The project, as described and introduced, includes a major architectural review, joint use parking, as well as a variance. So the project did go before the board previously in April 18, just a few months ago. And there were a number of items that the board wanted to see the applicant try to address and come back with. And a lot of those had to do with the privacy and some of the daylight for these spaces on the interior. And that had to do with residences that are along Webster, as well as the interface with the unit and the Redwood Terrace space in the back, which is solely for the use of the office space. And then some of the other interior layouts for on the upper levels of units 15 and 16. Also, they wanted to see some bicycle parking added at the grade where possible. Also to review the overall height of the building in relation to some of the floor to ceiling heights, to consider adding an accessible ramp at Webster Street, and to finally review some of the lighting throughout the project. And the applicant has a pretty extensive presentation on how they address each of those issues, but just in summary, we believe that they've addressed those. There are a couple of them where the height, for instance, there's some constraints that the applicant has mentioned about the elevator, so maybe we can seek some other comments about that, how to further address that, or maybe it's okay as it is. So just in summary, on the project, it's a 3-story mixed-use project. There is an offset in the floor area ratio, and that's just for efficiency of the project, that some of those utility spaces are and trash spaces are included more on the bigger, larger parcel. It's more access to Webster Street versus having that on a smaller parcel, trying to get access on Hamilton. It's not really a good idea to do that. So for a better project, there's some offset in the FAR on the site that way. So the project does propose rental units, so therefore the project would pay just the impact fee for the affordable housing. The project does include a level of basement parking, and it does include a lot of those in the mechanical types of lift spaces, and those are allowed by the code. So the code does require 60 spaces. The project does provide 55, but with the project's joint use parking requests and their accompanying transit demand management plan, we believe that the reduction is okay. So this diagram just shows what I mentioned previously about the FAR distribution, and those shaded areas are the utility and trash rooms, so they're accommodating both the office and the retail on that space, and that just makes sense that there's access straight to Webster there. But otherwise, there is a courtyard in the middle of the project for open space, and as I mentioned, there's that terrace area in the back that preserves some of those on-site mature trees, and that is for the sole use of the office space. There are a couple areas for the variance application. There's a 17-foot setback, special setback along Hamilton. So any protrusion in there would require variance of some kind if they want to do it. And so in this case, we believe that these are warranted, they're okay, they're canopies, as well as a fin wall that is designed that can be detached if for some reason the city needs to use the space within that special setback area. And the canopy, of course, is above ground. So we believe that this variance is warranted, given the restrictions in the area. And then this just provides a cross-section of the project and some of the floor plates that we were trying to describe. They are a bit generous, but I think the idea is to have a clean aesthetic for the roof line, as well as there's some limitations with the elevator that was chosen. It does have a low profile amongst other types of elevators, but again, the applicant can describe that. And I'll show one rendering here. This is along Webster and the changes that were proposed. They did add a little more landscaping there to have more privacy. So the rendering above is the previous version that was shown in April, and then below is the new one. So in conclusion, the project does respond to the ARB's comments, and the various requests is acceptable. These revisions proposed and implemented increase the consistency with the required findings. So with that, we do recommend approval of the proposed project to the director, and based on the findings and subject to the conditions of approval. And that concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of Sheldon before we hear from the applicant?
Is it possible to pass the material board up?
May we hear from the applicant? You'll have 10 minutes once everything's set up. And if you could, as always, spell your name for our transcriber.
Yes, my name is Rosalind Cole, Roslyn-Cole.
I'm afraid you need to speak even more closely to the mic.
Okay, is this better? Yes. Right. Okay, I'm Rosalind Cole, principal with Adlin Darling Design, and I'm pleased to be here again with you today. We have looked at all of your comments and would like to run through that quickly, because there are a number of them. Also with me today is Lauren Ewald of Fletcher Studios, so she can answer any landscape questions you might have. So as Sheldon has mentioned, we had a good deal of feedback from you, which is really helpful, and we'd like to walk through that one by one. The first item is the suggestion that we increase the privacy to the ground floor residences at Webster Street. And so we have looked at this carefully. The image that you see up here is different from the one in your package. It was very hard for us to actually render it. Within the rendering we had, it got very muddy in the background. So we thought it better to start fresh with an image that would show you more of what it would look like. And so what we're doing is we're proposing a revised planting, which would provide a greater height and privacy for those residences, while still providing an openness. So as you might recall, we started this project a year or so ago, providing fences along those those units to provide privacy. And at your suggestion, we pulled them away to really provide a more urban context. And I think we went a little too far by making it too low in the last go-around. We feel like we've achieved a balance here that allows for the privacy for the unit as well as the openness that we would like to keep. One of your other items that you suggested we look at relates to this. So this is looking at those 2 units for the daylight and privacy from within the space. So we have provided some images of what that looks like when you're looking from the living room out to that terrace area and then back to the courtyard. We recognize that there are very different people and people who look for very different things in the apartments that they choose, and we think that these are apartments that would be very applicable for the urban dweller who wants a direct connection to the outside and more of a direct connection to the street. But that said, we have provided translucent glazing at the door as well as shades at the windows for privacy should that be desired, and that is typical in all the units. For Unit 3, which is the corner unit by the Redwood Garden, we have also shown you here the atypical kitchen casework elevation. I think there was a comment on how the casework and the window might work together. So we've designed the casework to sit above the window at this location, which provides space for a shade pocket to provide a direct connection to the exterior. At this unit, the kitchen, which is located here, has a landscape buffer of 6 to 7 feet before the terrace starts. So that landscape buffer provides a distance and some height of planting, and there's also 2 magnolia trees there to allow for that a little more privacy for that unit. For units 16 and 15, we thought it was really helpful to actually relook at this in terms of the privacy of the unit. We have relocated the window for unit 16 and then reoriented the planters to provide more privacy between unit 16 and 17. In addition, we've changed the landscape material to a taller chain fern, which basically will grow 3 to 5 feet to provide additional privacy between those terraces and the walkway. So we have taken your suggestion to add more parking at grade by adding 2 more spaces at the corner entry. So this brings our parking count and short-term parking count up to 6 from 4, and 4 is our required minimum. So I'd like to spend a little more time on this one, so I'm trying to rush through some of these other ones because obviously looking at the height was something that we did very carefully, and it's a little bit of a complicated issue. So
We're happy to give you a couple more minutes if
Are
you
you?
need it
Okay.
to make it clear to us what you're doing.
All right, I'll slow down. There are a couple of driving factors in setting the building height at its 40 feet. The first is that our first floor is set by being 1 foot above the base flood elevation. We then have 2 elevators within the building, each with their overruns, and that sets the height of the 3rd floor and the 3rd floor at the residential unit, and then the 2nd floor where the office elevator comes up. Now, what we're specifying is a Schindler elevator, which has a 12'7" overrun, and it's the lowest that we've been able to find. Most are in the 13.2 or 14.5 foot height range. And even with these, we're not bringing our typical floor plate over. We're having a very special acoustical separation at that location, where we have a residential unit. And then at our roof, we're popping up just a little bit, but still where you're not able to see it from the street. And the last floor, basically in this sandwich, is our first floor, and that right now has a clear space of 10'4" in the office, but that is before the mechanical ductwork. So that mechanical ductwork will add at least 12 inches to that to lower down in those locations, and we feel that that's as really low as we can go within an office space. So for these reasons, we are asking to keep the height where it is. We've also just taken a step back and looked at the project. We haven't looked at these images for a while. They're in your package, but they have not been part of your presentation. Just to look at this building in the context of its neighbors. And it is truly, as Sheldon has said, a transition building. It transitions from these taller buildings. All of its neighbors are taller than it. Obviously, the church, it's 70 feet, but our adjacent neighbors and then the neighbor across Hamilton. And then we have our lower residential neighbors. And as we're addressing that by opening the building at the top floor, creating a glazed corner, and then bringing that third floor line to align with the roof line of that building. So we feel like that the building, with its 40-foot height, still really deals with the transition at this corner. You had suggested that we look at adding an accessible ramp to the Webster Street entry, and we think this is a very good suggestion. We have added this in as a straight ramp, a 1 in 12 ramp, but added it in with by adding another planter and layering it in, so we still have the cascading steps that come to that corner. And we think that this is an improvement to this corner for many reasons, accessibility, of course, being the primary one. Here, you asked us to look at the central terrace and the light levels. And we think that this space is going to be quite nice. It's 30 feet by 32 feet. And we have two analogous spaces that we'd like to show you. Here is the Stanford Central Energy Facility, and that space is scaled very similarly. You see the courtyard through the center of the space here. And then the Oakland Museum at its front entry canopy. This is much longer, but daylight appears along the side and then in the back in a similar proportion for the space here. And I think both show that the space can feel light and not dark. At the third floor, we looked at the lighting and thought that was actually very helpful. We went back and looked at finding a new fixture for this, and this fixture has brought down the lighting level significantly, but it still provides an even level. We haven't changed the number of fixtures, so the lighting level is even. In looking at the controllability, we're proposing to provide that through both a photo cell and then through the ability to have a dimmer for occupant use. So the intention is to keep it low, and then if an occupant needs to use it higher, that it would be set higher. We were concerned about the on-off occupancy sensor and the kind of flickering of that through time. So we have also looked at the landscape buffer to our north, and after meeting with our neighbor, we have added 2 additional trees along this boundary property. We have a utility line that runs into our utility space here, so we're unable to add any more trees along this area. But the coffeeberry shrub that is located and proposed here can grow up to 15 feet. So we think that it itself will also be a good buffer along that northern neighbor. There are a couple of planning requested changes, as Sheldon has mentioned. We now have updated things to show how we meet the new ordinance between lowering the stall count from 67 to 60, and then increasing the open area. So the increase for the RM40 parcels increased from 1,300 to 1,950 square feet. But I think it's important to note that we have 2.5 times that amount for this project. So we're well within that. And then lastly, we have pulled the building back a foot from the property line. Originally, the building itself sat at the property line, and we had window projections as well as the eaves moving into that to provide depth for the building. And so we've worked with planning. We feel like that depth is really important to the facade. So we have taken a foot out of the courtyard and a couple of inches out of the units to pull the building back and allow those, so those windows are no longer in the setback. And then we have also worked very closely with planning to allow for the fin to extend, but basically has separate rebar cages and be able to be cut off if it needed to be in the future and still be structurally sound. So the remaining images are just the elevations. Here, the straight elevation, the elevation with the new ramp, the Webster Street elevation, and that elevation with the new ramp. and planting. And then view from Hamilton, you view from Webster, the central terrace, and then the corner. And with that, we look forward to hearing your comments.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the applicant's architect before we go on? Do we have any speaker cards? Yes. Just one? John Carl Friedrich, please. You have 3 minutes, Mr. Friedrich.
Yeah, thank you. John Carl Frederick. I live in Barron Park, but I've, in the last 50 years that I've lived in Palo Alto, I've lived about half of that time on the north side. And I'm here to speak in opposition to this project and a denial of the approval for demolition for a number of reasons. Number one, I think the work to this point by city staff is inadequate at describing the historical character of the building and the attending landscaping. I think this project is way too invasive. I think there's no reason to grant a variance for the 17-foot setback on Hamilton. I also don't think that the inventory of the trees is adequate, and I'm sort of surprised it's not contained in this report, especially tree number 4 next to the existing building to the west, which is unique in Palo Alto. I don't see, and even in the elevations, I did not see evidence of what the problem of removing all the magnolias on the street will be. And then the fruit trees that are going, 3 orange trees, a fig tree, many bulb plants, and even the redwoods, which this report claims to protect, I would doubt that finding given what's happened to the redwoods at the corner of Ravenswood and El Camino in Menlo Park. And to build underground parking and intrude that closely to the property line of the public parking area is going to create problems in the future there. I also think that the character of the building itself on the corner, if you had elevation pictures of it, you would see that this is a remarkable change. It's a magnificent building. I sort of have an affection for quads because I grew up in one back in Milwaukee. There's very few, this might be the only one left in town. And it's beautiful inside, clear hardwood floors, foyer. I don't think any of you maybe even went inside the building there on the corner. And the loss then of 9 units of affordable housing, and I would put it at higher than that because the little brown shingle house that's scheduled for demolition if this permit is granted easily holds 2 people and 2 families. And the garages alone are a substantial piece of property. So what I think was lacking in this plan and in your review of it is the fact that this property has a large amount of space without demolishing the corner building, in which 16 units of housing could go in there. Now, I don't know how you can find, given the environmental problems, a negative SECA finding, that there's no impingement of the general welfare of the people of Palo Alto if this demolition permit goes forward. And I would recommend that you continue or deny. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frederick. Just to be clear, tree number 4?
It's the pine.
It's the canary?
It's a unique pine. It's right up against the building. There, behind the brown shingle house. It's the only tree other than the redwoods on the property line.
Okay, any questions of Mr. Frederick before we...
And then the other tree is the big avocado in the
Right.
back. And go there and sit in the backyard, and you see how much open space is going to be lost by the granting of demolition here.
Thank you. Does anybody else wish to speak? The applicant has 10 minutes to respond.
Good Good morning. My name is Brandy Bridges, Bridges, and I'd like to say thank you to the board for hearing our project today, and thank you to the members of the public who came to comment, and others that we've heard from in preceding hearings. I understand the concerns that were just voiced. I think, though, that there's a lot to like about the project that we're proposing. The existing site holds 9 units of housing. That is true. They are in a state of disrepair, and we've had a property condition report done, and they're not appropriate for long-term ongoing occupancy. So we would propose, our project proposes to replace those with 19 units of new housing, code compliant, energy efficient, and safe for occupancy. We have had the property also studied in terms of looking at the historic nature of the property, and it's been analyzed by multiple parties. In fact, the city's historic planner looked at the project, a third-party historian was hired by the city to review the project, and the landowner also hired a consultant to review the project. All 3 of the reviewing entities agreed that the 3 properties were ineligible for listing on the registers, and also ineligible for listing not only on the California register, but also on the city's register. And so they're not considered historic resources for the purposes of CEQA or for permitting. All of this information was reflected in the minutes from the hearing that we attended on a voluntary basis with the Historic Review Board back in 2018. I don't disagree that the buildings there are quite lovely. I also have an affection for the nature and character of particularly the yellow building. But I think that we have to acknowledge that there's an existing lifespan for structures, and I think that what we have to look at with these is that we have an opportunity to increase the housing supply, which in a fashion, that increase of supply, I think, is part of the equation to improving our housing crisis here in the Bay Area. The landscaping that we've proposed, that was another topic that was raised. So the existing landscaping on the site, the front yard is primarily grass, which takes a lot of water consumption. Our project that we're proposing will have primarily natives and drought-tolerant planting. And we actually are proposing, to remove the trees. When we met with the city arborist, we looked at it as, in terms of asking them, what is it that you think we should do? So we had an arborist that looked at it, the city's arborist looked at it. The existing magnolias are in a state of decline, and so their preference was for us to remove the trees. With the replacements that we're proposing, we'll actually have a net increase in the urban canopy, a significant net increase that's reflected in the plan sets that you have before you today. So, I think that replacing, the kind of water-hungry grass with some native plantings is on balance a good thing. I'm not sure about the numbering of that particular tree, but I do have, that was brought up in the comment, but I do have here before me the arborist report, and I believe that the tree in question might be the Japanese black pine, because that's the only pine that I see listed. And that tree was noted by the arborist as poor retention suitability due to poor structure. So that's not one that we've focused on much before, because the arborist has kind of already commented on that. The redwoods, preserving those redwoods is very important to us. We've made great effort to ensure that our building will not damage the redwoods by pulling back the full garage. And then we have in that area, the landscape plan shows kind of wood planking, and that's to let the air reach the roots of the redwoods and also to let the water kind of go down and reach the roots of those redwoods. So we really want to protect those. We think it provides a great buffer between this project and the large city garage that's next door, and kind of does a nice screening job, but also they're redwoods. We just want to protect them because they're gorgeous. Other comments, I think I've addressed, the variance. So I think that what the variance request, really what we're trying to achieve with that is getting some depth in the reading of the facade. And this property does have some unusual characteristics that make a variance appropriate. Namely, we have the historic neighbor next door at 530 Webster. And so we wanted to make sure that we set our building back far enough that we'll stay in alignment with 530 Webster instead of stepping too far forward. And so, so we've kind of compressed our building back along that Webster frontage more than's required by the city setbacks. And then on the other corner of the building, we've pulled in to kind of get away from those redwood trees. And so with being pushed in on the Webster side and then also being kind of pulled in on the redwood side, it just creates a condition where it's hard for us to push the building any further back without getting closer to 530 Webster, which is something we don't want to do. And so, so with the variance, we can let the roof eaves and kind of extend out, and also we can do a nice canopy over the commercial space. And I think that that's a good trade-off to make. So with that, I guess I would just close by saying that, we first visited with the board, I think it might have been just over a year ago, and I feel really good about the project that we have before you today. I think it's very different than the project we originally presented. The feedback, the loop of the process has been great in terms of receiving the feedback, and each bit of feedback has helped us make this project better. So I'd just like to take this one last opportunity to say thank you. I think it's been a good collaboration with the public, with the board, and so thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of the applicant before we bring it back to the board? David? Seeing none? Any comments from staff before we start discussing this project? Who would like to begin? Ozma. Okay, we'll skip Ozma. David?
Generally speaking, I like the project, but I do have some reservations. Can you hear? Okay. Move closer. Okay. A minor one was the suggestion I made the last time was to use the Hamilton side to provide a skylight or possibly light down to the parking lot, but I don't see that that's included in any way in the presentation right now. I just find that underground parking isn't really pleasant. It's a personal issue for me, that as much light as you can get in. Now, I know, of course, the entryway is well lit because of the break in the platform of the deck, et cetera, above that allows the light to come through. But it was a suggestion that I thought would enhance the parking facility. But it's a minor concern. My major concern here is that in order to maintain your parapet and your cornice look to the building, you're requiring, and because of the elevator, as you mentioned, it has to have an override. You have a humongous height to the top floor of this building. I frankly just don't understand. I think if I were looking at this as a part of as a developer, I would think that somehow we're spending an extra 3 feet all around the entire building in order to allow for that elevator override being within the frame of the box of the building itself. It doesn't seem logical to me, and actually it makes some of those apartments uncomfortably high. Kitchens and bathrooms with ceilings quite that high don't make any sense at all. And that's a major concern, I think, for me, that the height of that floor is really ridiculously high. And that's speaking from a point of a person who owned a brownstone and had a 11-foot ceiling and thought that was quite adequate for a kind of a brownstone. But when you exceed that in a building, a new building like this, I don't think it's sensible. Last time I also mentioned Unit 14 and the ones above it, where the kitchen faces the courtyard in the rear. I simply don't understand why when you put a kitchen in most of your units closer to the front door, in this case, the kitchen is on the perimeter wall, where you could simply have windows, but you choose not to do so. Is that, if I understand the plan, that's the plan I'm looking at, unless you've changed it and there's a new plan, those units, all of them that face the rear court have the kitchen misplaced on the outside wall. If I'm wrong, correct me, please.
Unit 14 has the kitchen on the outside wall, but it does also have windows. And we could show an image of a similar condition if that would be helpful.
No,
Why don't we hold that until we hear from everybody, and then we can
Okay,
see if we
fine.
need further enlightenment.
All right. But I mean, my personal objection is that light that you get into the kitchen directly really isn't the same as if you had a living room with a larger amount of window, and that the windows that you do have in the area of the living room, which are on the corridor, simply are not private windows, and you have to diffuse the glazing at that point. But let's address it later on. You know, in all other respects, I think you've answered the questions that we had at previous hearings. But those three issues, with a minor one being a skylight, have been well addressed here. Thank you.
There you go. Thank you. Board Member Thompson.
Thank you for this project. I am struggling a little bit with the renderings. Looking here at the material palette, and metal 1 in the material palette is this sort of dark metal color. And in the renderings, I'm looking at page A5.3E, and it's sort of the main fascia at the top and at the bottom, and it just looks brown. And I think that's actually kind of important to not show it that way, because it's not going to be brown, it's going to be black, according to this. And even your main panel boards, fiber cement board color 1, in the renderings are showing very brown. And this is more of a taupe, but it's kind of, it doesn't have the warmth that I think that brown color would have when I'm looking at this material board. So in terms of all the other items that you've addressed, the privacy on the ground floor, and the slew of other things you went through, I feel pretty good about that in terms of the revisions that you've made. But just looking at this again, the renderings look really nice, but I don't buy that with these materials that you've chosen that'll actually look like this in real life. And so I kind of want to alert the rest of the board to my concern on that, because otherwise, this project seems to otherwise be looking pretty good. I think this is an important item that we would actually have to look at later, just because, the wood soffit matches the renderings, but the main panel board, which is like the heart and soul of your project right now, that's what everybody's going to look at, is this material that seems otherwise a lot like the concrete, and I don't know that that's the design intent, it sounds like you want that differentiation between your concrete at the base to kind of give you that grounding, and then something warmer and lighter above. And I don't think that this material is the right choice. So that's my only note right now. Otherwise, I think that you guys have done a pretty good job in this package. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Alex?
Okay, so I can recommend approval today. Thank you for the revisions. I think they look good. I think to comment on previous board member comments, I think with regard to the height, I do understand the comment, and I think there's a balance that we have to strike because it's mixed use. So you're talking about, it's too high for residential, but they have office on Hamilton, and so there has to be some sort of middle ground. And the heights that they're proposing are a little bit low they're on the low side for office. So I think the architect has it correct that if you look at the context-based street elevations, the building looks fine in context with the church and the office building across the street. And I think that's the main thing. And however many floors or whatever the heights and the interior configurations of interior elements relative to the windows and stuff, that's all sort of internal. And to me, that's not really part of the board's findings. I mean, I don't disagree with you about all of that, but it seems to me that that's the architect's problem. And on the skylight to the garage, I think that's all very nice. I mean, I think we've commented on that kind of thing before on other projects, on commercial projects, and I think that's all desirable. I don't know if it's feasible on this particular project. And then I think to Ozma's comment about the materials, I didn't sort of pick that up until you sort of brought it up. I think that the rendering on, I think I get that. And then I think I was thinking that when I looked at the renderings, it seemed to me that the color that's shown on the renderings looks like the church across the street to me. I haven't matched anything, but this one, I think when you pointed out, I think that the material here doesn't really quite do that. So maybe if we can come back to the subcommittee, maybe there's a different way of doing this. But if it's there may not be a lot of, I don't know, there may not be a lot of options if this is an integral color material. And I would think having an integral color material is better than painting it. So I am, if you want to do one more round to subcommittee, I would be okay with that. But I would imagine that they've picked the best. I mean, I do trust architects generally to pick the best color of the ones that are available, and I don't have any better suggestions. It seems like this is better than like any of the options in the Hardy panel range. So anyway, and then so my last comments are just on just cleanups on the findings. So for our staff, on page 15. On item L 3.1, it says second floor, and I think you meant like the third floor. On page 19, no, skip that. Page 21, item number 6, it mentions Cambridge area, and I think you mean Webster or Hamilton, or I think that's just a cut and paste issue. And I can support the variance findings, although that's really the purview of the planning director.
Thank you. Vice Chair Balte.
Thank you for the excellent presentation, and thanks to my colleagues for their insightful comments. I'd like to focus on two things, I think. One is Ozma's comment about the materials, and the second one is about the height of the building, which I agree with David. I think what Ozma was driving at is that the elevations don't really depict the way these materials will play out on the building. And I think she's right that this fibrous cement has almost a pinkish, reddish tone to it. Which you're right, Alex, it's like the church is now, but they just painted it. And it's unfortunate, it just painted away the beautiful textured aged concrete, and now it's got this pinkish hue I suspect they regret.
We know that you do in any event.
I certainly do. The building was lovely for years and years with this aging character to it, and probably was leaking, so they had to do something. But it's got this industrial-looking pinkish concrete coating on it now. And I'd hate to see that happen to this building. Osmo's correct that these facade panels are large, and they are be very visible. So I think what Alex is suggesting is right, that it might come back to a subcommittee to just review that, and perhaps the architects may want to consider that. When you correct the coloring on your elevations, you may realize it's a bit too pink, in my opinion. The same with the brown trim band. That's the one color in this palette I find is just not that rich looking. It's not typical of of one of your buildings or your firm. The bigger issue for me is the height. And you're quite correct, Alex. I agree that it's not for us to lay out the interior of the building or select the plate heights. It is important for us to make sure the building is contextually compatible, and I find it really is not with 530 Webster. All the other buildings in town, it works great. It's not too tall for Palo Alto. It's not that the building is too massive. But perhaps you could pull up for me, one of the elevations, the view from Webster. Is that possible to get that on the screen? Well, hold on a second. If you look at this image here and look at the right-hand side of the building compared to 530 Webster.
This one?
Yeah, Alex is holding up the actual architect's rendering from the corner of 530 Webster. But if you also look at this one that's on the screen now, very smallly, you can see 530 Webster in the background, and I think you can see that this building is substantially larger than 530 Webster. Visually, it really seems to overpower that building. And that building in particular, to me, has a real sense of presence on the street, a real character to it. And I think the building next to it is just a little bit too big. And then when I hear the reason it's a little bit too big is really to do with the technical thing about elevators. And it strikes me that it is possible to configured so the elevator overrun goes through the roof and you have a bump out somehow. I would rather see a small bump out on the roof with the roof plate being lower than I would see the entire building be substantially taller. So to me, it seems that the building should come down maybe a foot of each of the two residential floors, and we can ask the architect to revise the way the elevator overrun on the roof works through the roof, and then in the third floor, you have to find a way for your residential unit to accommodate that overrun somehow if you can't find a different elevator. But to me, the building is just too tall vis-a-vis its relation to 530 Webster, and that is very much our province to solve that. So I'd like to see us request that building get pushed down. I think we can still recommend approval with that condition. I can support the variance findings. I think it makes good sense, and the design itself is wonderful, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you to the applicant for an interesting, attractive project and for really clear documentation, which has perhaps made us more focused in our critique than we might be in less clear work. It's both been an advantage and disadvantage for you, but we, of course, think it's an advantage because we think the truth will set us free eventually. Thanks also to the members of the public who have spoken to us both today and earlier. I wanted to talk briefly about Mr. Frederick's comments. So I took notes on them, and of course, we don't disagree with you that lovely gardens and existing buildings are lost with this project. Relatively affordable housing is lost with this project. We don't have power to address those things. That's beyond the scope of what we do. The city used to have ordinances that made it uneconomic to destroy existing rental units, though in this case we're actually getting new rental units rather than condos, and the state of California took away the authority that we were using. The city council adopted a historic preservation ordinance, and the Palo Alto electorate repealed it. Efforts to have more tree protection than we do have also failed. So we need to work within the context that we have, and so our question really is, how is this building in this context as an aesthetic object itself, as a place to live, as a place to walk by? And I would say that I think, particularly if it's designed to look like its elevations, it's a very attractive building, and it will be a good place to live, and it will be a good place to walk by, which is no small item here. I have been to a lot. I have heard Emma Kirkby sing in that cathedral-like church. For Methodist Church, it's pretty cathedral-like. Across the street, it's a heavily traveled corridor, on foot and otherwise. I think this is a good building and a good use to put here. We've been very concerned about the effect that it will have on the buildings to its right on Webster. I do think that you've done a good job of addressing our concerns, which come up a lot in new residential projects, of how you have ground floor units that relate to the street, but yet have an adequate sense of privacy. I think you've done that well. I like your increased parking. I like it that your parking is underground. I agree with David that some natural light in underground parking is great. We have some good examples. I'm thinking at the corner of Lytton and Emerson, for example. And there's some counter examples on on Everett. And I am concerned about minimizing the height while maintaining attractive uses. So at this point, and I very much appreciate, I realize I'm easily seduced by beautiful drawings, and I appreciate Ozma's commentary on the materials board. So I think this project is ready to, and I do find the variance findings compelling. You mentioned that the fin wall would be removable in the future if the city needs it to be. Is that a condition of the approval of the variance? It needs to be.
Yes, but, do we have that? We'll ensure that that is a condition.
You can't just say, oh, we're taking it back unless you have, the applicants agreed to leave that right with the city.
Yes, so the point is that it's going into a special setback,
Right.
and should the city ever need to use that property, we'd want to make
So
sure.
you will be sure that the approval documents that the property owner needs to have a covenant that they will do so that runs with the land.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. The applicant's indicating they're fine with that. So I would suggest referring 3 items to a subcommittee. The first would be the materials, and as I understand it, we like the elevations more than the materials submitted. So the goal would be to come up with something that works, but the guidance towards the subcommittee from us would be that we,
I think mainly,
how would you phrase it?
I think mainly the design intent, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but the design intent does seem that there's kind of a cool base and a warm, middle upper. And at the moment, the materials palette doesn't it doesn't seem to reflect that design intent. So I don't want to necessarily stipulate what that material should be, but it should be something warmer to reflect that design intent.
So you're describing the upper floors, which to me look brownish, pale brown,
Yeah.
and the bottom floor looks creamy?
Well, the bottom floor is all that board form concrete.
Right, but when I'm looking at the elevation, that's not what you see at all.
Yeah, it looks white. But in their precedent imagery, they're showing a lot of wood for the wall panels. And I think when I remember first seeing this project and kind of believing that this would be a really heavy wood project, that it might have that warmth, because wood has that warmth. I don't know. I think that was kind of the contrast they were trying to make between the wood and the concrete, the heavy and the light, the warm and the cold.
So are you saying that one of the things you'd be looking for is contrast between the upper and lower floors?
Yeah, but I would say I don't have a problem with the board form concrete. I think that's good as the base for the cold.
My only concern is that one thing I know for sure is I'm not going to be on the subcommittee, but I think it would be useful maybe we can just decide that any 2 of you working with a very skilled architect have the capacity to do what needs to be done here and just say nothing further. They'll just review the colors. It looks like you're happy with that. Okay, so for the subcommittee to review the materials in light of the comments today, to review the height with a goal to reducing that by a couple of feet if possible, even with a preference for having an elevator that pokes through the basic form if necessary? How would you say that?
Well, to get my vote, I'd like to say not review the height. We already asked them to do that, and it didn't get us anything. I'd like them to reduce the height by at least a foot on each floor of the upper 2 floors. So it's 2 feet total.
By 2 feet?
And I hate to be prescriptive on this, but we did ask
So we'll
once
say
for it to
2
be
feet or
looked
more.
at, and we didn't get much result, so.
Okay, and then to review the garage lighting, and I put it that way because I agree with David that daylight is wonderful if you can do it. I've been really impressed in the last few years with the great basement level, parking level lighting that can be achieved with LED fixtures. I think the Medico, is it the Medico Dental building? Whatever. The building across the street from City Hall has a beautifully lit garage, the best I've ever seen, and that's done without natural light except from the driveway. So I don't know what the solution is. I agree with David, it needs to be basically shadowless. But garage lighting would be the third item for referral.
I don't,
No, that's not our, I think that's beyond our purview.
Well, if we can require exterior lighting,
I believe David was referring to skylights, natural lighting in the
Right.
garage.
I agree.
And that's a rather large change for the architects to try to incorporate.
Okay.
Right now, I think.
so what's the consensus of the board on that
And
point?
whether they brightly light it with electric lights or not.
None of our business.
So I think David's recommendation is wise, but maybe,
You don't support it?
no, I just think it's not reasonable to ask the architects to change something like that at this point.
I would call that not supporting it.
Not supporting it, fair enough.
So from a findings standpoint, we do have finding number 4, which is the design is functional, allowing for ease and safety of pedestrian and bicycle traffic, providing for elements that support the building's necessary operations.
Yeah, if I thought this was we often comment on the interior design of garages if we don't think they're functional, but I think I'm hearing from everybody but David that you think it's good enough for the findings. I'm seeing some nods here.
Yeah, it meets the same standard we've applied to other similar buildings.
Okay. Would somebody like to make a motion?
Commissioner
Or comment.
Commissioner Burr, may I make a quick comment
Yes.
regarding the height, with apology?
You need to be a little closer to the mic, however.
Okay, apologize. With regard to the height, the recommendation in terms of what the committee would be looking for, I'm wondering if we could make it a bit less specific than saying 1 foot per floor, because what's challenging for us on the residential floors is that middle floor, when the office elevator comes up, we kind of have to maintain that height because we have looked at every elevator out there of all the major manufacturers, and we've selected one with the lowest overrun. And so that middle floor, we really can't play with that height much. If we need to reduce height, the place to do it, as you were mentioning, would have to be at that top floor by doing a bump out. And so I think if we could leave it a bit more flexible in terms of how we look at that when we're in committee, that might be helpful to.
I think we were
the
saying 2
project.
feet overall.
Oh.
Is that,
I'm sorry, I'm just looking to the architect for
Feel free.
direction in terms of.
You guys can't be that demanding. They have to work, they have to engineer the building. They have to work out with
I
products.
understand they do. One of your colleagues suggested a 2-foot requirement. You don't
Yeah.
support it.
If we might say a goal of 2 feet and leave it to the folks in the subcommittee, and perhaps the people most concerned, maybe one of those could sit on the subcommittee. Just a suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm kind of.
To my colleagues, by the time this gets to subcommittee, it's pretty well fixed. I think we need to decide now. It is possible to eliminate a closet in that apartment and let the bump out take the place of a closet. It's possible to shift the 4-story elevator slightly further into the building so it gets picked up with the mechanical screening. And I understand the architect is frustrated by that, but understand our frustration. We brought this issue to your attention, and it didn't seem like we got more than just a bunch of elevator specifications on it. We understand and appreciate that it's technically complicated, and I completely agree with Alex. The last thing we want to do is tell you specifically what to do. Our concern, my concern, I believe the board's majorities, is the relationship to 530 Webster. And that the building now is just a little bit too tall to relate to that building. I think you can't take 2 feet off the top floor and leave the middle floor that height. It'll look wrong. And we're not the architects. Your architect needs to address this situation.
So I think what we need to do is have somebody make a motion and see what the board supports.
I have a quick question.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, as a point of information, could you clarify that in fact, part of this is in the approval for demolition that the 17-foot variance is acceptable under SECA?
Yes, we have said that.
Thank you.
Did you have a comment, Ozma?
Yeah,
I think we should also comment, we're not approving the demolition permit.
Right.
This is ARB.
We're just approving the
Demolition is
design of the new
separate-
building.
Yes, there's a separate.
And we're asked to review the environmental documentation.
Do we know the height?
I mean, one of the things that's confusing to the public is that what the caption says is that we're asked to approve a project which involves the demolition of buildings, but we don't actually issue demolition permits. Okay, go ahead. Ozma, did you say something?
Yeah, sorry.
I still want one of you to make a motion.
I'm not ready yet, sorry.
Okay.
So we're looking at A5.2C, so
Could you put that up? A5.2C.
this is 530 Webster, right? This one? Do we know the height? So it says it right here, sorry. So it's 69 feet? 0.6 versus 85.1. And are you saying that lowering the height by 2 feet will make a difference in terms of how it relates to that building?
I believe so, yes, Ozma. I think right now the third floor plate line itself is above the height of 530 Webster. And there's that trim band that relates those two. And that's usually what we're looking for is let the neighbor building go up a floor. But this one seems to me sort of aggressively more than a floor. It's both. The 13-foot floor on the second floor is a little bit too tall, and then the whole thing pops up another 13 feet.
So your issue is not with the 85 total, it's with just where the datum for the top of the second floor is?
No, it's both. I think the datum should line up better with 530 Webster, and then the roof itself, having these very tall plates, I think, sort of accentuates the situation. Would, if we reduced the request from 2 feet to 1 feet, would that be more palatable to you?
Well, I'm kind of in a place where it seems like the height difference is so much that I don't know that it would make that much of a difference, whether it's 1 foot or 2 feet or 0 feet at that point, just because it's so much further lower. It looks like it's at least 15 feet lower, that whether it's 14 feet or 13 feet. I think really the main context that we're seeing, like the bigger street, I guess, I don't know, it seems that, I guess I've just come to accept that it just will be a change. But I guess my bigger question was, I think in your original comments, you had mentioned a change in massing, where they would step down, or was that?
No, absolutely not.
Okay,
no,
good,
no.
because I would not agree with that.
Okay, I'll try to make I'll make a motion that we recommend approval of this project, including recommendations regarding approval of the variance with 2 conditions. One, that the materials be returned to subcommittee, in particular the fiber cement siding selection. 2, that the overall height of the building be reduced by a minimum of 1 foot, with no stipulation how that gets done.
Is there a second?
I will second.
Would you like to speak to your motion?
No, I think we've said everything about it.
Any further discussion?
Yes. My concern is that 1 foot really isn't significant enough. And I think that the second floor as well needs to be reduced more than that. That when we actually see this building in construction, we're going to regret the fact that we have been lenient about the heights here. and that they're really quite excessive in each of the floors, and that what's ruling this whole decision is that the elevator overrun is an issue. You know, as Mr. Bolte pointed out, planning could take care of the elevator for the office space, and a bump out on the roof could take care of the elevator on the third floor. I think that actually we're going to regret the look of this building being quite so massive, and that reducing it will not affect materially the exterior
That's enough.
good image that the exterior has on the street.
Very well. I'd like to amend that motion and say the building height be reduced by 2 feet. I'll need a new second, I think. Oh, actually, am I allowed to? The motion was made and seconded.
It would need to be seconded.
Yeah, feel free. You would like to amend your motion.
Well, let's try for 2 feet and see if
Okay.
it flies.
So I'll second it for the purposes of debate. My question is, I agree with David that this frontage on Webster shows a building which is much higher than its neighbor, and which is the neighbor, incidentally, that I'm most concerned about its interaction with. I'm not concerned about what it's going to do to the parking garage, the large office building, or the very large church. And it is true that generally when we add an additional floor, we add an additional floor. So you can see the horizontal continuity between the top of the second floor and the adjacent second floor building. So one of the findings we're required to make is about context. One of the biggest critiques we get from the general public, which don't spend quite as much time thinking about this as we do, at least not individually, is that we don't pay enough attention to context. And I don't know if 2 feet is enough to accomplish a sense of not looming. I also understand that whether this building makes 530 Webster look comfortable, or if it makes it look like the building that's next scheduled for demolition, has a lot to do with the design of the edges. So I would appreciate some guidance from my colleagues.
Well, I was going to mention, like, how, I know we're spending a lot of time on this, but like
It's a big building.
how do we know that that smaller building won't be up for demolition and for a higher building height anyway? Like, we're spending all this time.
It's actually irrelevant.
That our
We have
job
to-
is to make it work.
To
for
make
this
it work
building now.
as is.
Right.
The context is what it is today, and what happens tomorrow is absolutely
Way
irrelevant.
beyond our control and not what we designed for
Sure.
or review for.
However, the building is historic, so more likely to remain. I also, just from a factual standpoint, the parapet of the adjacent building is 69.6 feet. The finished floor for the third level would be 72 feet. But again, that's the finished floor versus the parapet.
That's, I guess, above the metal panel fascia that we're looking at.
So when we look at that elevation 5.2C, could you point out what you're talking about on the new build, on the proposed building?
There's an elevation on A5.4, and that's where I'm getting those numbers from.
Right, but if you look at A52C, the lower drawing, there's windows, there's a horizontal element. Where's the finished floor that you're referencing? I guess I
Yeah,
could look
the
at
architect could probably help us with that.
This is the finished one, the top of the brown trim.
The top of the brown trim?
The top of the trim, it represents
you.
the floor height.
This must be the parapet, so that's 3 feet difference.
Okay.
It'd be better if it were lined up.
Oh, do we know the depth of that trim? Like, what's the bottom of that trim? I'm only asking because in the elevation on A5.4, it looks like it lines up with that parapet.
Yeah.
It's 1'8.5". 1'8.5".
One foot, 8.5 inches? Thank you. So to confirm, the adjacent building is 69.64 feet high?
Correct. The parapet of the adjacent building.
I mean, sorry, it's above sea level. That would be a pretty high two-story building.
So
If
that
you have
would
a
make,
question of the architect, go.
so that would make the bottom of that fascia at 70'4". So it'd be about.
Could we have some further clarification from the architect? Peter, why don't you ask your question?
To the architect, you're a very strong design-oriented architecture firm, and we feel very resistant to telling you what to do. Do you have a response to how to make the building integrate just a bit better with 530 Webster?
I think that we have looked at that a lot. I'm not, and I'm not trying to be defensive about it. I do think it's an important condition, and I agree that that is what makes a project. I don't know. We can look at it further as to what we could do to kind of try to integrate more at that corner. The heights, my fear of lowering the building and exposing the elevator is that it has kind of a much greater negative effect on the other elevation in terms of the feeling of the building and the consistency of it. And so I'm not saying I know what the solution would be, because I don't think it's really to bring that pop-up so close to the front edge, and then it's constrained by the garage. I mean, this has been a puzzle of a building, so we're trying to piece all these pieces together. I think I don't have a solution for you here. So if you'd like us to look at how to make us better contextual with 530, we can do that.
If I may just add to what Rosalind was commenting on, I think that when they presented the images to us, one of the things that they kept emphasizing was the metal panel that you all were just asking about the dimension on, and pointing out how important that was to trying to keep that kind of close in line with the top of the 530 Webster building, because that kind of draws it together and helps it fit more contextually. And so I think that that's pretty important. So I think if we're trying to look to a dimension, making sure that we don't offset too much to lose that relationship. Another thing that as we were playing with it and trying to flex on the issue over the last few months, one of the things that we were realizing is that we felt it was pretty important to try to keep the relationship of the windows equal on the second and the third floor, if at all possible, because the proportions matter. And so we were struggling with that a bit, because as even if we actually did look at possibly having the office elevator run up into a closet and kind of modifying that unit. And if we bring that level down, then it changes the proportion of the windows. And so I think that to keep it contextual, those are the things that we'll have to play with as we work with the subcommittee, to make sure that we don't lose the elegance of the architecture, but to make sure that we kind of keep that alignment of that metal panel somewhere near that top of the 530 Webster building.
Question for you. How high is the landscaping supposed to be between those two buildings? How tall?
Are you speaking of the landscaping kind of along the privacy fence? Mm-hmm. So the coffee berry can grow to 15 feet, and then I'm going to look back to our landscape architect for the height on the trees.
Of course, I'm actually asking you how many feet above sea level, since that's the data.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, where I'm going is my solution is always plan it out, which is not very respectful of architecture. But what's driving us is the conflicting desires to have your building look well proportioned, have it respectful of the building next to it so that it doesn't diminish that building as it's experienced. And I'm curious as to how high. I mean, I have coffee berries. not very big ones. So I'm really asking you, is that landscaping intended to get as high as 530 Webster or not?
So 530, what the height on the 530 Webster building again is, Rosalind, can you help me? 24 feet. So no, it would not be as tall as 530 Webster because we would only be 15 feet tall in the front area. In the back, we do have trees which would grow higher. I think one other, it does bring up an interesting issue about privacy. And one of the things that I liked about where the building landed in relation to 530 Webster is that we've got the landscaping kind of at the ground level hiding those windows. Then we've carefully placed the windows in the mid-tier. And then where we have the top level, we've studied those angles. And if you look at those angles, because it's high enough up, you don't see down into the units at 530 Webster. So, and that's something that I met with the 530 Webster owner, and we reviewed that in detail, and I think that they were quite happy with how that was turning out. So
Thank you. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
So these are all drawings and plans. Any consensus?
I was going to, with the permission of the chair, offer to the applicants. I think the votes are here to reduce the building by 2 feet, if not more. Or I'm open to discontinuing the project, and you guys go back and work your magic and show us something that aligns better, height notwithstanding. Which would you rather do? Through the chair. That's.
So at this point, would you like to come back to us one more time or go to a subcommittee with a condition of reducing the project height?
I think our preference would be to advance to the subcommittee and work through the issue there. And I think that we can find a way to, I think we will find a way to reduce the height by the 2 feet.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So then I'd like to add to that motion one additional statement, which is to say that the trim band at the top of the second floor on the new building better align with 530 Webster as direction to the subcommittee.
So could you take me through your motion at this point?
So the motion is to recommend approval with the condition that, A, the material selection come back to subcommittee, specifically the selection of fiber cement siding, and 2, that the overall height of the building be reduced by 2 feet, with the additional caveat that the trim band at the middle of the new building better align with 530 Webster.
Is there a second?
Board Chair Firth, you had seconded last, unless we're starting over.
Right, I'll second for the purposes of, well, not for the purpose of discussion. Okay, why don't we vote on that one, and if that doesn't pass, we'll have another vote.
Okay.
All those in favor?
Aye?
Aye.
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 Nay.
Well, what do you know? 4-1. Okay. Congratulations, your project is referred to subcommittee. Thank you for all the hard work. Thank you for all the good design. Thank you for all the neighborhood participation. Look forward to seeing it. We're going to take a 5-minute break till 10:05. All right. The meeting of the Architecture Review Board for July 18th, 2019 is back in session. Item number 3, a public hearing on the Newell Road Bridge Replacement Project. We are asked to review the environmental impact report, allow for public comment on that impact report. So essentially, we're holding the public hearing for the environmental impact report on this project. And consider a major architectural review application to allow for demolition of an existing two-way bridge on Newell Road between Woodland Avenue and Edgewood Drive, and the construction of a new multimodal bridge on the same alignment that meets Caltrans standards for multimodal access. The public comment period on the environmental assessment, this is a combined federal and state environmental review document, incidentally, so everybody uses slightly different words, but the public review period ends on July 30th, 2019, so those who wish to comment should do so before that. The adjacent property in the city, at least, is R1 10,000. Could we hear from the project planner, please?
Good morning, board members. Claire Hodgkins, project planner on this project. So the project before you today, as you noted, is Newell Road Bridge Replacement Project. And Newell Road Bridge crosses San Francisquito Creek at Newell Road between Edgewood Drive in Palo Alto and Woodland Avenue in East Palo Alto. And to avoid repetition, I'm going to just give a brief overview of the project description and then let Public Works Engineering speak to some more detail about the purpose and objectives of the project. The city is required to identify a proposed project for the purposes of CEQA. So after thorough review, alternative 2 in the environmental analysis was selected as the proposed project, and that was done in coordination with other responsible agencies for the project as well. So the plans before you today reflect that alternative, which includes replacement of an existing 2-lane bridge with a 2-lane bridge along the same alignment. And the new lanes would be wide enough to meet Caltrans standards for SHAROs, which are shared bicycle and vehicle lanes, and also includes a sidewalk on each side of the bridge. It's being raised, the existing bridge is being raised to allow better flow capacity beneath the bridge. And the project also raises a portion of Woodland Avenue and Newell Road Bridge. And it includes some retaining walls to support that road being raised. For informational purposes, we've also included a site plan in the plan sets for the other 3 build alternatives. So if you look in your plan sets and you see alternative 1, 3, and 4, those are the other potential alternatives being considered. Public Works Engineering is also going to provide a bit more information on each alternative that was evaluated in the draft DIR EA, and the staff report also provides a little bit more information on those alternatives as well. So this is just a quick view of Newell Road, of the bridge from Newell Road in Palo Alto. And this is a view of the proposed bridge from East Palo Alto on Newell Road, again, looking over Woodland Avenue. So part of the purpose of this meeting is to provide another opportunity for public comment on this project. As you noted, the circulation period for the draft DIR EA is ongoing right now and ends on July 30th. This is the 4th and final public hearing during that review period. But we're also here to request that the ARB provide comments on the design of the proposed project. So any thoughts you guys have on the bridge, the railings, the retaining walls, the landscaping in particular would be very helpful. And then any comments you may have on the draft DIR EA are also welcome. And I also want to note that to the extent that you have comments relating to the NEPA component of the project, Caltrans is here today to answer any questions as the lead agency for NEPA. So in terms of next steps, the draft, as I noted, the draft EIR-EA comment period ends on July 30th, and then we'll prepare responses to all of those comments, and we'll be returning to the ARB for a formal recommendation on the project, and then going to council for a council decision. And with that, I will turn it back to you and recommend that you hear from Public Works.
Thank you. I had one question. So the other responsible agencies in this case are?
There are several other responsible agencies. City of East Palo Alto is a responsible agency. Santa Clara Valley Water District is a responsible agency. Regional Water Quality Control Board would be a responsible agency. So there are a number of different responsible agencies.
So this is like landing on an aircraft carrier. Okay.
Yeah, there are
And you said
quite a
this
few
is the
permits.
fourth public hearing. What have the other hearings on the environmental what have the other hearings been before?
There was a Planning and Transportation Commission hearing on, let's see, what date was it? June 12th. And then we had a hearing on a community informational meeting on June 18th. And what was the next one? Sorry.
Hi, Michelle Jeremiah, City of Palo Alto, Department of Public Works. I'm a senior engineer working on this project. The third meeting was scheduled for June 19th, and it was in Public Works Transportation Commission meeting in East Palo Alto. We also gave a brief presentation at the Joint Powers Authority, San Mosquito Creek Joint Powers Authority Board, and we've had a separate community meeting for the City Council of East Palo Alto that was done earlier in the week on July 16th.
Thank you. So first to my fellow board members, has everybody seen the site?
Yes?
Yes.
I have not, no, but I looked at it on.
All right,
Digitally.
everybody but Board Member Thompson's been able to be there in person. And does anybody have any conversations they wish to disclose before we hear from this? No, thank you. Would you like to go ahead with your report and spell your name for the transcriber?
Thank you. My name's Michelle Jeremiah, spelled Michelle, M-I-C-H-E-L, last name Jeremiah, J-E-R-E-M-I-A-S. As we change our presentations here, bear with us a minute. Thank you.
Run your clock from when you're ready to go.
There, thank you. So the purpose and need. The project is necessary in order because this project has been inspected over time by Caltrans, and Caltrans has determined that the bridge is functionally obsolete, meaning it does not meet the current standards, the Caltrans standards for either for lanes, travel lanes, or provide access for pedestrians and sidewalks, pedestrians through sidewalks. It's not providing any accommodations for cyclists crossing the bridge. In addition to that, the bridge has a couple of issues that are a concern. There's a stopping sight distance that's caused obscured by having, as you can see on this photo, by having the trees, the landscaping that block the line of sight. In addition to that, there is a vertical profile. As you approach the bridge crossing into woodland, the increased slope creates a visibility issue with the intersection of Woodland and Newell on the East Palo Alto side. Primarily, one of the bigger concerns on this project and how this is tied to an upstream project is that the bridge has a limited capacity. It can only allow 6,600 cubic feet per second to flow underneath it. The Pope Chaucer project, as some of you may know, had flooding issues in the past. 1998, one of the storm events that occurred, the Pope Chaucer has only the capacity to allow 5,400 CFS. Santa Clara Valley Water District, in conjunction with the JPA, are working on a project to replace that bridge. But however, that project cannot commence until this project is replaced. Commencing that project would transfer the flooding issue downstream to any resident who's affected adjacent to Newell. So there's an urgent need to replace this project so that we can proceed with the upstream project, and it would benefit the community by reducing the flooding risk that affects our neighborhoods. Project objectives. So as we have described our need, we also try to identify what are the objectives. How do we identify which are the options to be considered for the EIR? Several items were considered. The first one primarily was vehicles maintaining a connection between both jurisdictions, allowing not only vehicles to pass through, but creating sidewalks and providing for multimodal. With those, there is in line looking into, let's not increase traffic in either direction. It's also, let's not increase speeds. So those are items that were considered. The project before you, it's something that takes into account that should not increase speeds or traffic or divert traffic to other intersections. We've also looked at increasing the capacity of this bridge, increasing the capacity to something that is in line with the upstream project, and also based on the largest storm of record, which is the 1998 storm. So we're proposing to bring this up to about 7,500 CFS. That's the capacity of the creek as well. So if you will eliminate any constraints in the creek, that is how much flow could get carried through this creek from upstream all the way out to now the bay. And recent improvements also downstream have allowed us to increase these capacities. As you are aware of, there's a project that took place to widen the levees. With these purpose and needs, we also, the objectives, we were able to narrow down, and this is following several community meetings that have occurred in the last 7 years, to identify 5 alternatives. The fifth alternative not shown here is leave the bridge in place. But the alternatives that were considered was, the first was in my future slide, in my next slides, I will be able to show you a depiction of what these entail. But for the purposes of the public, the first alternative considered was a bidirectional 1-lane bridge. The second was a 2-lane bridge on the existing alignment. The existing alignment maintains the center line. We would replace the bridge using the center line as a control line. So the bridge would widen from the current bridge dimension. I think I forgot to mention earlier, the current existing bridge is 22 feet wide. That's from outside of the barrier to outside of barrier. The travel lane is only 18 feet wide. So we would replace the existing bridge and the current alignment as alternative 2. Alternative 3 looks at the same bridge, but a partial realignment, shifting the center line over 30 feet for closer aligned to the Newell Road in East Palo Alto. Alternative 4 is 2-lane alignment with a full realignment, 90-foot change. Alternative 1, so a little bit more detail for you guys to look at. This depiction shows what alternative 1 would include. Alternative 1 is a bidirectional bridge. It's only 16 feet wide. It provides 5-foot wide sidewalks that would accommodate the multimodal for pedestrians. But in order to accommodate 16-foot traffic in 2 directions, 16-foot wide, we need to install traffic signals. A total of 15 traffic signals would be needed. A majority of them would be located in East Palo Alto. The traffic signals would allow traffic to flow in one direction at a time. 1 traffic signal is needed on the Palo Alto side, and that's to accommodate this driveway approach right here. So vehicles would only be able to travel in one direction at a time. There would be long-term operation maintenance costs associated with this alternative for the fiber and for the power that's needed to run the traffic signals. The area of disturbance for purposes of comparison, it's 45,000 square feet. Alternative 2. Here's a site plan that shows alternative 2 in where it's in relation to the existing bridge. It's really difficult to tell, but you can see here the foundations of the existing bridge. This is, again, 2 14-foot wide lanes, 2 5-foot wide sidewalks. It would be stop controlled. The area of disturbance, again, is 45,000 square feet. This is similar to alternative 1. But in this alternative, also, one of the items that I want to kind of, as we proceed through this slide, I want to make note of, we were looking at the bike lane terminating at the end of the driveway approach here. We would then stripe within those 14-foot wide, 4 feet off from the curb, we would stripe a shoulder line that would create a 10-foot travel lane. The shoulder line would act as a bike lane. I know we've had a number of comments through the ongoing meetings that we've received regarding adding measures, so this is a little bit of a change. We've added more information on these slides for your purposes to show that the travel lanes in both directions are still maintained as 14 feet wide, but 4 of those would be shoulders, and that could be used for cyclists. Another thing to make note of, as Claire stated, we are raising this bridge by 1.5 feet, which also requires raising the approaches on both sides, on the Palo Alto side and the East Palo Alto side, by a total of 4 feet. That would reduce the vertical profile that currently creates a problem as people are driving over the bridge. Alternative 3, this is again 2 14-foot wide lanes, 5-foot sidewalks, partial realignment and 30 feet shifting. Again, stop controlled, and the area of disturbance increases. As you can see on the site plan, you can see where the existing bridge is in relation to the proposed bridge. Alternative 4 is a full realignment. Similar to the previous alternatives, we're looking at 2 14-foot wide lanes, 2 5-foot wide sidewalks with a full realignment. The area of disturbance is higher, 55,000 square feet. So as part of the EIR, it analyzed any things we would have to mitigate at a later date. For the purpose of the meeting, we've added a few slides to kind of clarify the trees that are to be removed. On the slide, it indicates the items circled in red are the trees that we anticipate to be removed. Of those 9 trees that are located within Palo Alto, identified the variety. We've got 4 eucalyptus trees that are right adjacent to these corners, a buckeye that I know a lot of people are in favor of, and then coastal live oak. So these are the trees to be removed. Several of trees to be removed also as part of this alignment would be located on East Palo Alto side. The proposed project, again, this is kind of showing you, we've made a few changes over the course of our presentations. We have an existing street light in place. That street light would need to be replaced because we are lifting the road. The proposed proposed retaining walls that are needed would be located behind the sidewalk, so those retaining walls will not be visible from the public, but for the most part, they would be visible on the East Palo Alto side by the residents of those areas. On our side, what we would intend to do is also provide some screening. This area does not create the line of sight concerns. The concern with the line of sight is located on Newell on Woodland. That's the area we try to avoid and add more trees. We're proposing right now to provide a California buckeye, a blue oak, and western redbud in this area. If you have opinions as far as what we would want to replace, I would please provide us any comments and let us know. I thought there was a need in replacing another buckeye, and we're providing 2 buckeyes in this location. Proposed a project, also we talked about the concrete retaining walls. As stated, the concrete retaining walls are located behind the sidewalk. This area shows where the retaining walls are shown in red. The retaining walls on the Palo Alto side would again be located behind the sidewalk as we're raising the road. The location of the trees are shown in green in this proximity. And I apologize, this isn't a landscape plan. This is an engineering plan that's been added with a few details to depict where the trees to be located. We also would look at guardrails to be installed. Guardrails are required to be installed per the CBC where the separation between the adjacent grade is 30 inches or higher. So we would try to provide those. For the purposes of the project, I think we are assuming retaining walls would be needed along this stretch. It's about 100 linear feet of retaining walls. We probably wouldn't need guardrails the entire stretch. We'd probably only need, as we conform to the existing grade, the guardrails would be eliminated. A little more detail as far as the bridge itself. As you stated, this project is funded by Caltrans, and they are reviewing it. We've got to comply to Caltrans requirements. Their standard for the bridge barrier is a type 80 SW for the sidewalk width on this. This is an area of what the guardrail would look like. The full height is over 3 feet. There is openings in the middle of the guardrail, which would allow also for vehicles to be seen as people are driving across from Woodland. And this would allow us to improve the line of sight concerns that we have. Other areas we're looking at in Palo Alto side, where the depiction of the guardrails would be installed. The guardrail would be located in the retaining walls, any areas that are taller than 30 inches. And that wraps up my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of staff before we go on? Before we go on to the public? Yes.
Sure. 2 questions, please. As I understand it, you want to increase the flow of the creek under the bridge to 7,500 cubic feet per second. Is it possible to do that by somehow widening the channel rather than raising the bridge?
Unfortunately, it is not. Widening the channel, we have to remove the two barricades, the foundations that support the existing bridge. We'd have to remove those foundations to do the widening of the creek. So there is no way of us to widen the creek in that vicinity and allow the flow to pass.
I'm sorry, you said if you removed the foundations of the existing bridge, then you could?
If we remove the foundations of the existing creek, it would increase the capacity, but we'd also have to raise the bridge to allow that 7,500 feet to pass, 7,500
So there's no way to not raise the bridge and increase the width?
No.
Second question, have you or anybody researched the actual statistics of traffic incidences, accidents, pedestrian, bicycle problems at this bridge right now? I understand that it's considered to be a dangerous intersection as you come over the bridge into East Palo Alto because it drops and you don't have good sight lines. Is there a record of actual accidents occurring there?
We do have a record. I want to say it was minimal number of accidents. I want to say it's negligible. I don't know offhand, though, but I think it was, we did not only information from City of Palo Alto Police Department, also East Palo Alto and Menlo Park, and I think we received maybe a total of, I want to say 2 or 3 offhand.
2 or 3 over the past year or period over total of recorded?
For a period of the last couple of years.
And is that a lot or is that many or few accidents for this type of situation, location?
I think it was negligible.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Thompson.
I had a question on the concrete barrier details section. There's a black square kind of underneath the big concrete box. NV, wait, does this have page numbers? I'm on alternative 2 cross sections. I think we did see it in your presentation as well.
Yeah, let me go back to that slide.
Oh, yeah,
Right
there it
corner.
is, 11,
Right
slide 11.
Right there.
There you go, in the top
Yes.
right-hand corner. There's that little black box that's underneath,
Right.
measured at 3 inches. I don't see that in the elevation. What is that?
So that little block box is and it's another steel, it's still part of the bridge itself, the guardrail. So it's a steel metal barrier that goes across on the intersection. So one of the things that we have to comply in this project, as you stated, there's a lot of difficulties involved and a lot of things that need to be measured out. In this circumstance is we need to meet Caltrans MASH test, meaning that if there's an accident and anyone hits the guardrail, this will prevent the guardrail from falling, this will stop this, it has to comply. This is one of the guardrails that has passed that MASH test. So we're installing a guardrail, a barrier that meets Caltrans standards. That small circle is as part of their standard barrier. It's small square, it's steel.
So it's the steel bar that goes across the whole thing, and it's not being shown in the elevation.
Right, I think it has been inadvertently omitted on the elevation right below.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions? I have a question. So I'm looking at page 2.1.5-17 in the environmental assessment, which is a drawing, photograph and photo simulations of the existing and future view from 2.1.5-17. Key view number 1, existing view, and build alternative number 2, simulated conditions from Newell Road looking towards East Palo Alto. And one shows a heavily wooded, big eucalyptus, dappled sunlight, as it keeps saying in the aesthetic section, and one shows a wide open, no shade, new bridge. In the environmental discussion, it talks about there would be some additional greenery and landscape softening and whatnot. Is this picture down below the initial state, or is this what it looks like with the grown landscaping?
This would be the initial state. So at the time that this was prepared, we just didn't know the landscape design yet. So we've been in the visuals today, we were adding in some of the trees that would be added on the Palo Alto side. I will note also that there is going to be additional landscaping. A lot of the landscaping that we can do on the East Palo Alto side is on private properties. So we are working with the private property owners to resolve kind of which trees are going to have to be removed and how they want it
So
that
this is not what the
replaced. So-
project is intended to look like when it's done?
Correct.
Thank you. All right, we have a number of people who wish to talk to us today, like to hear from. The first one is Richard Yankwich, to be followed by Kevin Fisher.
Of course, I would be the first one. I wanted to hear everybody else.
Love you. Put you in the back of the stack if you want.
No, that's okay. My name is Richard Yankwich, Yankwich. I live at 1490 Edgewood for the past 28 years. I'm about 150 feet away from the bridge. I'm the second house in.
I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you, you have 3 minutes.
I understand.
I'll give you a little more time.
I understand that the Newell Bridge must be replaced to improve water flows and flood control. But to limit and calm traffic, it should be as small as possible, unaligned, narrow, and short. I'm not sure this project complies with that. I'm making this comment because the staff report and the EIR underestimate both the traffic impact of the designs and the extent to which East Palo Alto and Palo Alto have conflicting cross purposes. I've been attending these meetings for the last 7 or 8 years and have gone through all the designs. I've also gone to East Palo Alto's 2035 EPA general plan meetings. The west side is intended to be the most densely populated part of East Palo Alto, and they are intending to add hundreds of units, commercial mixed use, and to raise building heights up to 75 feet, while the city of Palo Alto notes in this report that Crescent Park is a low-density residential neighborhood. This bridge literally is what's between those conflicting views of the neighborhoods: high-density mixed-use, low-density residential. So I think the bridge needs to be realistic about what's really going to happen over the next 100 years, because that's how long the last bridge was in place. The Palo Alto staff report doesn't acknowledge any possibility of a traffic increase. I would just direct your attention to where it says, however, the improvement would be so marginal that it is not anticipated to cause an increase in traffic through the area. No change in the TIR. That is incomprehensible to me, that you can look at what is planned by both cities and think that there will be no change in the traffic. The size of the bridge is going from 18 feet wide to 45 feet wide. What I'm most concerned about is that right now you can do sharrows and sidewalks and plan it so that people will use it in a nice, low-volume way. But when you've tripled the size, nearly tripled the size of the bridge, the pressure that's going to be on that bridge in the future to do away with the sidewalks, to increase traffic, do whatever we can to increase flow, because it's one of only 3 points where that whole neighborhood in East Palo Alto has access to Stanford, to the hospitals, to Palo Alto, to shopping centers. That's what East Palo Alto talks about all the time. And on the Palo Alto side, we act as if it's just going to be a bucolic, residential, low-density community. My concern is that the traffic has not been taken seriously, and I don't disagree that it isn't the best alternative, but maybe the one lane with a traffic signal will be better, because I don't know how to analyze this traffic, but I'm pretty sure that the EIR and the staff report really have not done so. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin Fisher, please, to be followed by Claire Elliott.
Good morning, folks. My name is Kevin Fisher. I live at 728 Allister Avenue. I've been in Palo Alto for 35 years now, 34. So 20 years ago, my family was a victim of a man-made disaster, which are the floods of February 2nd, 3rd of 1998. So I evacuated my small children in the middle of the night, carrying them through thigh-deep poison oak-laden waters. It's really a miracle there was no loss of life in that time frame. It's truly a miracle. I could go on, but I don't need to. My children are now in their 20s, and finally we are on the cusp of a solution that will reduce the chance of flooding. 101 to the bay has been largely solved, and the Pope Chaucer Bridge replacement is on the fast track. The main thing standing in the way is completion of a solution for the Newell Road Bridge. This Newell Road project has been bumping along for the better part of a decade. It was ahead, now it's behind, and I'm very frustrated by our city's inability to get something done. So now is the time to act. Pick a project, I don't care which one. Other people have opinions about the particular project. I want a project, so this man-made obstruction will be removed and the risk of flooding will be diminished. If my city cannot find a consensus and get a solution to this, literally the water will be on your hands. Not you personally, but the city overall. So I realize you're just one part of this larger, complex project, but please find a solution. Thank you.
Claire Elliott, to be followed by Hamilton Hitchings.
Hello, my name is Claire Elliott, and I'm a resident of the Ventura neighborhood, but I have ridden my bicycle over this bridge and driven over it. I also was a past city employee who helped get the permits for the water quality monitoring station that was underneath it, and would love to see at least flow gauge at that location, if not continued water quality monitoring. But I'm currently senior ecologist with Grassroots Ecology, and for over 20 years we've been involved in stewarding San Francisco Creek and various entities like Peninsula Conservation Center, Bay Area Action, Nectara Stewardship, and now we're Grassroots Ecology. So my primary concerns are about the natural resources element. I have commented in the past about concerns about the hardening of the creek banks, and that we minimize the amount of hardening that we do and find ecologically friendly ways to protect the creek from erosion. My other concerns are related to the natural resources in the form of the vegetation. There's, the EIR. Unfortunately, I haven't seen the design. I looked on the city website, but didn't find a preferred design. So I'm just going on what it said in the EIR as far as possibilities and what the mitigation would be. And then, but I hear from Michelle that the Buckeye tree is slated for removal, and that tree has been one that I have had my eye on for years and have wished to have nominated for heritage tree status. I brought a picture that I took in the spring a few years ago. I see an earlier picture that Michelle had up was of the tree in bloom. It's got an amazing canopy, and in the spring, the scent of those flowers, it's like you're in Hawaii. And it's a venerable old tree that's been there, I guess, for over 100 years. I discovered that of our 8 heritage trees in Palo Alto, only 3 of them are native trees, 2 redwoods and 1 oak. And this tree is not only aesthetically amazing, and I was really concerned that the EIR said, and I quote, would the project substantially damage scenic resources such as trees? Well, that's paraphrased. The answer was no. Scenic resources aren't visible because the trees block the view. Again, I paraphrased, but that's what it said. You can't see the forest for the trees. And so the impact on the aesthetics. And it said there was no forest land damage, and well, this is a riparian forest. I'm glad to see that the EIR says that the native trees should be replaced 3-to-1 and the non-native trees should be replaced 1-to-1 with native trees, so that's a step in the right direction. The EIR lists invasive species, but does not list eucalyptus as one, even though it's on the Calypsi list of invasive species, the blue gums. And I believe that people are not aware of the value of these native species in habitat. This is like taking out an apartment building and replacing it with 3 single-family homes for the amount of habitat it's providing. Or like a roommate of mine who ran over a Stradivarius. Well, that's okay, we'll just buy 3 new Stradivarii. So I really would like to see a design adjustment that allows us to maintain that bridge. In the past, Palo Alto's been very good about maintaining oaks, the old roads that go around, trees.
I need to ask you to
sum up.
Wind up, yes.
Yes. So I'd love to see maybe a hybrid between 1 and 4 so that the bridge is narrower and realigned to be able to protect that tree species. And yeah,
Thank you.
I will also provide comments to the EIR in writing.
Thank you. I have a question for you. What's the view of your group on the Himalayan blackberry in there?
We remove a lot of
Foul, invasive, or good habitat?
It is not good habitat because it replaces a lot of native species that are used more by our native wildlife, and it's very invasive. So we are removing it in a lot of places and replacing it with a native blackberry.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Hamilton Hitchings. I live in the Duvenick St. Francis neighborhood, like Kevin. What Kevin didn't tell you is that after that night, he and his family with his children had to move out for 9 months while they remodeled the house, because his house was one of 400 that had over-the-floor flooding. In DeSoto, a lot of people stepped out of their bed into over a foot of water, and in places it was 6 feet deep. There are thousands of houses in the flood zone, and when I woke up at 3 in the morning, Channing was a river. It's really hard for us to imagine, but it was a river and it continued to rise, and by the morning it was within an inch of coming in my front door. We really want this bridge. The average flood capacity is, on average, it will overtop the banks every 22 years. It's been about 21 years. Now, it doesn't mean that next year it's going to happen. This is a 1 in every 22 years. But the flood capacity is fairly low. And the reason is because in the 1940s, a city engineer filled in the sides of under the Newell Bridge with concrete. So that significantly reduced the capacity. Now, as they've said, to get to 7,500, you have to actually replace the bridge and raise it. But a city engineer made it a lot worse. We really need this project to increase flood protection for our neighborhood, Duvenick St. Francis and Crescent Park. It's also dangerous to walk and bike across the bridge, which a lot of people do every day. And while alternatives 1 through 4 all dramatically increase pedestrian, bicycle, and vehicle safety over the bridge, 3 and 4 would realign it. So in theory, it would increase speeds and the amount of traffic. And it's also important to keep in mind that many school children use Newell Road for their safe routes to school. For the Green Middle School, it's like packed with kids on bikes in rush hour. So for those reasons, I oppose options 3 and 4. In terms of funding, 85% of the $8.5 million is covered by Caltrans for alternatives 2 or greater. I heard they were in the room today. I'd like them to speak to whether they would support option 1 or not, because I think that's an important decision criteria, because it would be nice not to have to pay the 85% of the $8.5 million. For these reasons, I believe that, based on what I know right now, the preferred alternative number 2, selected cooperatively by the City of Palo Alto and East Palo Alto, is clearly the best overall trade-off. Please proceed with haste before another flood like the 1998 flood significantly damages hundreds of homes in Palo Alto. And thank you again for your time, and also for the staff for doing a nice job on the EIR. Thank you.
Thank you. Thomas Rindfleisch, to be followed by Xenia Hammer.
Good morning. I'm Tom Rindfleisch. I live on Tevis Place, which is across from Eleanor Party Park. I had 1.5 feet of water in my yard in 1998, and we're 21 years out from that date and have finally a plan for getting the creek up to a level that would handle the 1998 flood. Pope Chaucer Bridge is basically the dam, but it can't be replaced until Newell Bridge is replaced. And so I believe that we absolutely have to move forward. There was $28 million in damage in 1998 from that flood, and we cannot have another one. We've had 3 very near calls in the intervening years. I manage the Crescent Park Neighborhood Association email list. Every winter during the rainy season, I get lots of messages about should we sandbag, should we evacuate, what should we do? And it is absolutely imperative that we move forward. I believe that option 2 that has been proposed by the city is a middle-of-the-road, absolutely defensible option. The two extremes and the arguments for the two extremes have been going on now for nearly 10 years, and we've made no progress forward. I believe we need a compromise. I believe that option 2 provides a way to satisfy Caltrans requirements. I believe it can also be modified as necessary to control traffic in terms of volume and speed. It accommodates pedestrians, it accommodates bicyclists. And as was mentioned, we are fortunate to have Caltrans supporting this replacement project. And the funding that is available for that is something that facilitates what is going to be probably a $50 million project to increase the flow capacity of San Francisco Creek. If that comes away, we have another problem of how to get the funding in place, and I think it's silly not to take advantage of the opportunity that Caltrans has afforded us. So please, please, help us get this bridge replaced, and I believe alternative 2 is a perfectly good plan for doing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Xenia Hammer.
Hello, I'm Xenia Hammer, and I live on Sharon Court in Palo Alto, and that's close to the intersection of Channing and Newell. A few of the earlier speakers spoke of the urgency of this project, and this project is truly urgent. The flood happened more than 20 years ago. This project has been in discussion for the past 8 years. It's time to get it done. This project is necessary for flood control on San Francisco Creek, as Ms. Jeremias and prior speakers talked about. In terms of the alternatives proposed, the 4 build alternatives would all meet the flood control criteria equally well. Alternative 2, build alternative 2, which is the proposed alternative, when a few minutes ago you compared it to landing on an aircraft carrier. Alternative 2 lands on the aircraft carrier. Both the City of Palo Alto and East Palo Alto have to agree to this project. Alternative 2 meets that criteria. Alternative 1, I've heard East Palo Alto officials saying that that would not be acceptable. Alternative 2 provides increased pedestrian and bicycle safety. It can incorporate traffic calming measures that would ensure traffic safety for all involved. So another thing to keep in mind in evaluating various public comments is that the folks on the Palo Alto side who live close to Newell Road Bridge are currently not in the flood zone. They are just fine with the status quo. And that's because of the specifics of this creek. The ground level next to the creek is actually higher than farther away from the creek, and because currently Pope Chaucer Street Bridge would divert the water currently the way it is right now. So in evaluating those comments, it's important to realize that the folks on the Palo Alto side who live close to the Newell Road Bridge are just fine with the status quo. Thousands of folks in Palo Alto who are in the flood zone are not okay with the status quo. So it is important to move forward with these projects as quickly as possible. So I urge you to move forward with this project, and especially with the locally preferred alternative, build alternative 2, because it lands on the aircraft carrier. Thank you.
Thank you. And it does not look like it fell off a spaceship. Okay. We've been asked to do several things. There's nobody else, right? We have no further speaker cards. We've been asked to do several things. One of the things is that we had a question from a member of, one of the commentators asked for Caltrans, a statement from Caltrans, and maybe you can answer this.
Sure.
About whether they would participate in funding of Alternative 1?
They will not participate. The staff that's here from Caltrans today is here to answer NEPA-related questions.
Go ahead, Claire. I just wanted to kind of clarify some of the, when the first person who spoke had a comment regarding the width of this bridge. Yes.
45 feet wide. It's not. It's actually 42 feet wide. Okay. It's also not proposed a current locally preferred alternative.
I'm sorry, you have to speak a little more slowly.
Also, the locally preferred alternative is not aligned. So just wanted to point of reference.
And that's option 2.
That's option 2.
Which keeps the sort of existing extreme traffic calming.
Exactly.
If I could also add to that, I think that a lot of people are kind of saying, well, it's double the size, and then there's some concern that that would increase traffic. And I want to clarify that it is wider. However, we're looking at a curb-to-curb width of 18 feet. So, and it's supposed to be a bi-directional bridge, so that's about 9 feet per lane, which is not really enough room for 2 cars to safely pass each other. So with the new design, we'd be looking at 14-foot sharrows, but there, as we noted, the shoulder would be drawn at 4 feet. So we're talking about 10-foot wide vehicle lanes versus 9-foot wide vehicle lanes. A 4-foot area for bicyclists who could also share the road, and 5 feet on either side for pedestrians. So really most of that width is coming from additional bicycle lane area and additional pedestrian area.
Okay, I have one question. So the 10 feet that's dedicated to pedestrian use, is that at a different elevation? Is that a raised sidewalk?
It's slightly raised, yes.
So it's not intended to be an extra space for bicycles or?
No, currently it's not. The design ahead of us shows the shoulders adjacent to the travel lane. The sidewalk is raised by 6 inches, a typical standard sidewalk.
Thank you. Anything else staff wants to add in your 10 minutes? Any further questions of staff before we bring this back to us? So we've been asked to do 2 things here. One is comment on the environmental assessment, and the other one is, I guess, comment on the proposal. Well, it is comment on the proposal. That's a request from staff. So any comments on the environmental assessment first? Peter?
Yes, great, thank you. Overall, it's a very impressive impact report, at least as far as the ones I've seen. It seems to me, however, there's 2 things that it's lacking on addressing properly. I think that the project will raise the grade between 1 and 4 feet over a fairly significant amount of distance in the side roads, especially on the East Palo Alto side. And I don't see it addressing sort of secondary things like how much more dangerous does that make riding along the sidewalk, or if you have a traffic accident and you go over this 4-foot embankment, or if you live just on the other side of this 4-foot retaining wall. I think it's a significant impact, and I don't see that addressed in the report. The second thing I think one of the members of the public mentioned is that I think it is likely that this new bridge will increase the traffic flow between East Palo Alto and Palo Alto. Let me rephrase that. I think the traffic across this bridge will increase between East Palo Alto and Palo Alto, maybe not because of the bridge, but traffic's going to increase, and I don't see much of a mention of what that does to the Palo Alto side, at least. The people who live along this road are going to be impacted. Traffic is going to increase, I think, because of development in East Palo Alto. The bridge perhaps facilitates that. In any case, all of that I think should be at least discussed in the impact report. Those are my 2 comments on that. Thank you.
Anybody else have comments on the impact report? In that case, I have one. This is an environmental assessment right? It's not the federal equivalent of a negative deck. This is a full-blown environmental document. So you can find adverse impacts as long as you deal with them. So you have more freedom of action here. I think it's a really sophisticated discussion of the aesthetics. It's a very thoughtful discussion of what's there, of how people perceive it, of how it will change. I don't think that this document makes the case for no impact, primarily with respect to the replacement of heavily wooded, rich riparian habitat, even if it needs to have some trees and bushes removed, as opposed to what we see in the lower figure at 2.1.5-17. You may be able to make that case if you better explain to us how it's intended to work when you do that landscaping and that replacement planting, and you do the maximum tree conservation. But I don't think you've done it yet. I think it understates the value of that great, overgrown bramble patch, which is quite lovely in its own way and is quite important as riparian habitat, which is a rare commodity here. So I think that section needs to be reworked and beefed up. And perhaps we acknowledge that there is a permanent loss. I don't know. But as it stands now, if I was reviewing this from the outside, I think you haven't made your case that there is no adverse impact. And having done that, you failed to address how to make it better. I mean, if you have to do a statement of overriding considerations, so be it. All right, any comments on the other area where Claire asked for comments, which was the proposed alternatives themselves, particularly alternative 2? Alex?
I'm fine with alternative 2.
Peter?
I think alternative 2 is the preferred solution. It's certainly okay with me. I have 2 design ideas, I guess, to throw out, and now seems to be the time to do that. One is that be careful with your 30-inch grade separation requiring a railing. That's a code minimum, and it may be appropriate inside a residence or something like that where people are very familiar with the project. But I think on the side of a sidewalk, if you have a 30-foot drop-off, that's a dangerous situation, and you should have guardrails to a much less grade change. So just consider not just a code requirement. Secondly, maybe it's a folly, but when I drive down El Camino and go over the bridge over the same creek between the 2 counties, there's a small cast-in-place memento saying you're going from San Mateo into Santa Clara. And this is a 100-year bridge. Why don't we leave our children with something on the bridge, cast into it somehow, just a memento that says this is the county line or this is the date it was built. It's an easy thing. It doesn't take much to do, but it would be nice to see some detail like that added to the project. Thank you.
Ozma?
I'm also fine with option 2. My only concerns, which I think have already been discussed, are the impact to the landscape and the foliage. And so, I'm sure everyone's doing what they can to retain as much as possible. The replacement trees do seem a lot less than what's getting removed, so that's a concern. And then the actual design of the barrier, the MASH, what was it called? MASH test rated barrier. I don't have too much experience in what all the particular formations are with that. Not absolutely in love with the design chosen in terms of that, but again, if we have our, if we have to meet a criteria and there aren't that very many designs that meet that, then it just is what it is. But if you're asking for our comments on it, I think it could be better. But it is what it is.
David?
Well, I also agree that number 2 is the best solution. I also agree with my cohorts here who say that the landscape plan is very important. We see excellent engineering drawings here, but we don't really see the aesthetics of what you see in the environment above it completed yet. And I would hope that that would be added to this study. The shape of the bridge seems to be a shape based on engineering, again, to prevent the car from destroying the perimeter there. But it isn't particularly aesthetic. But I think you could go along with the protections. It's very important, of course, crossing the bridge. So I wouldn't look at anything too much different than this. It's a sort of a functional situation. It doesn't really, and it isn't really a major crossing all the time, so I think it's okay to be functional rather than extremely aesthetic. But some delightful items could happen here as well. A little more creative thinking somehow. Really pleased. I happen to live on San Francisco Creek, a little further up, and I'm glad the water will be flowing better down this way, and hoping for improvements to our area as well, which would follow, I'm assuming. I happen to be in a non-flood zone, but feel a little sorry for my neighbors who aren't and who in fact are lower than they ought to be relative to the creek. I'm wondering about the bicycle lane. Does it continue around? I don't know whether I'm going south on Woodland or where, but it seems to stop abruptly. Is it a continuation on Woodland?
The bike on Woodland and on Newell and East Palo Alto side, they have sharrows. So the bike lane would end at the return on the return of the bridge.
And I think that meeting the level changes relative to the height of the street seem to be trickier in the East Palo Alto area than they are in Palo Alto itself. But there is one property there, and that's going to be raised. Their roadway is raised significantly to create access to the road. That's been negotiated with the owner of that property?
We have met with all the property owners, and the one property I think you're referencing is 475 Newell, and we have been talking with them. They are aware of what's going to happen and what we will need in order to adjust their driveway approach.
Uh-huh. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. I think the landscaping, it would be really nice to see a more advanced design drawing for the landscaping throughout.
So I arrived here in 1998, right after the flood, which is why the house that I've lived in for the past 20 years is not in the flood zone. Being in the city attorney's office, dealing with some of the flood aftermath and talking to traumatized new friends and coworkers was, it was quite the event. It was very hard on many people. It looks to me that the choice of option 2 is a good one. I do think that I support Board Member Vice Chair Balte's suggestion that think about incorporating some element of commemoration and beauty here. It's true that our bridge into Menlo Park has interest of that kind, and our bridge into East Palo Alto should as well. Where does Chaucer Street Bridge come? What's on the other side of Chaucer Street? I forget. More Menlo Park?
Yes.
Thanks. It's a notorious phrase at this point. I do remember spending lots of time looking at those gauges, watching the water levels rise. It's nice to not do that. I do think that these creek banks are some of the most beautiful places in Palo Alto. This is a very rare creek, as we all know, one that still flows to the bay. And that should, I think the work has been careful in this environmental review, but I don't think it's been thorough enough in terms of that aspect of what's precious about this particular landscape. I think it undervalues it. Thank you for all your hard work. I think we have nothing further to say. You don't need any motion from us at this point, do you? All set?
Well, I think the staff report recommends continuing it, right?
Want to continue this to a date uncertain? Could I have a motion to that effect?
I'll continue this to a date. I move to continue this to a date uncertain.
Is there a second?
Oh, second.
Motion by Thompson, second by Liu to continue this to a date uncertain. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? None. Passes 5-0. Everybody present. Thank you so much for coming to speak to us. Thank you for your continued interest in the project. Thank you for your continued work on the project.
Thank you.
We do not have a study session. We have two sets of minutes. They're actually in our packet. The first is for June 6th, 2019. Have people had a chance to review them, and is there a motion?
I'll move to approve the minutes of June 6th.
Is there a second?
So the minutes are missing both sets of minutes are missing the subcommittee action.
I beg your pardon, Alex?
It's the same comment that I always have.
But somewhere I thought I saw subcommittee minutes.
It's a discussion that we have here on the
About the
dais
need for them.
that the subcommittee is coming, but it's not the action that the subcommittee took.
Okay, staff, subcommittee minutes?
Yes, we're going to, we've added those certainly to some. It looks like we've missed that on these, and so we will add those in.
Will you bring them back to the ARB for further review then?
We can bring them back, yes.
Thank you. Okay, subject to the note that, let's see, which one are we on? Sorry, I completely lost track. We didn't just vote on that? Okay. No, we didn't. So, motion from whom?
I made the motion. Alex is making a friendly amendment that we request staff to include the conversation about the subcommittee.
Right, and that one was the Pacific Catch Restaurant?
Yes. Big project.
That friendly amendment is acceptable by me.
All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. So staff will note that we're missing the minutes for the subcommittee on Pacific Catch. The next set of minutes is for June 20th, 2019.
So same comment, 744 San Antonio Road, which is the Marriott Courtyard and AC Hotels. There's a
project?
subcommittee item that reviewed the window mullion
Right.
color with respect to the building color palette, and it was approved.
All right. So, is there a motion to approve the minutes of June 20th, 2019, with additional directive to staff to return at a future date with the minutes for the subcommittee on 777? Is that the address? San Antonio?
744 San
Sorry,
Antonio.
744 San Antonio, i.e. the hotel project. Is there a motion to that effect?
Well,
I'll move
in the
that.
last set of minutes, I think we just approved it, and that staff can amend it. Right, and it wasn't coming back to us.
I beg your pardon. So, we have not yet voted on the June 20th meeting minutes, is that correct?
You don't even have a motion yet, no?
I don't even have a motion on them, right?
I wasn't there on that.
Okay, so Balte and Hirsch were missing, so that leaves it to the three of us. I move we approve the minutes of June 20th, 2019. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Comment? All those in favor? Aye.
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 Passes 3-0. Only three of us having been present. That's Firth, Liu, and Thompson in favor, Balte and Hirsch abstaining. And again, noting that we are missing the subcommittee meetings minutes for that date. Okay, item 6. We've already, North Ventura report, Alex.
It's on hold until it comes back to the council.
Okay. I have an item just of general interest. Speaking of the linguistic landscape, there is a book in press coming out shortly. I have just misplaced the names of the authors. But it's a study of the changes in signage in Brooklyn. The authors are Edward Schneider, SNAJDR, and Shauna Trench, SHONNA Trench, forthcoming from Vanderbilt Press. And it's the historical and ethnographic analysis of signs and gentrification in Brooklyn from 1995 to the present. And it's really interesting in thinking about our notions of what signs could and should say. And the movement from signs that say things like scissors sharpened and another 15 specific items at the hardware store to signs that say bump, conveying that it has clothes for pregnant women. But you might find it interesting in thinking about the reviews we do of signage. The last item is I sent to you late as usual a draft annual report based on previous commentary from us at our joint meetings and from Alex aside from it. I don't know when you would like to take action on that. Certainly does not need to be today.
When is this drafted as a letter? We consent to council as it is?
I haven't had a chance to really read through this.
Why don't we continue it to the next regular meeting?
I'm okay with that.
And I will say that I was not looking for editing. I was looking for, are the concepts generally acceptable? But that's going to be up to you all, what you want to do.
I just think it'd be better to put something out than not. It's been a while we've been talking about it.
It would.
The guts of this, without having read it in detail, seem about right. We did talk about it twice previously, didn't we?
We did.
And,
We should still read it, though, before we
we
send it
should
out.
still read it, of course. Okay.
Let's just do that. Let's just talk about it at the next meeting. Hopefully, we can all get a chance to read it before then.
Okay.
Okay, so staff, if you would put this draft on the next regular meeting. My excuse this time is bronchitis, but actually it's terminal procrastination.
And a little bit of moving your house.
Well, yes, it's true. Disrupting my life. I hereby resign as chair of the board. I hereby resign as chair of the board. So I guess, Jody, you conduct, does that makes Peter automatically become, vice chair becomes chair?
Not automatically. I mean, maybe for this portion of the hearing, but we would need to vote if he's to become the permanent chair.
Okay, I did not review the rules again. Ordinarily, in the absence of a chair, the vice chair chairs, so you need to ask for nominations and vote on.
Very well.
chair.
I propose that we have a vote to elect a new chairperson and a new vice chair. And I can't very well nominate myself, so I'll look for someone to do so.
Well, I'd be happy to nominate you then, Peter.
Okay.
I will second.
Thank you very much. I'll accept the nomination. I will then nominate Ozma Thompson to be the vice chair of the board.
I will second.
Oh, I can second that, too.
Okay, so then we have a motion on the table for a new chair and vice chair. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Okay, the motion carries 4-0 win.
Congratulations. I get to vote. I'm still here.
Okay, thank you. At that, we're,
Who was the second on vice chair?
I was.
Okay.
well,
It's 4-1. I'm still a member of the board, just not chair.
you're right. Okay, you're right. So 5-0.
Oh, yes, and we do
And
have a little more
then-
ceremony
So
afterwards.
then before the meeting is closed, we have one last presentation to make to
I think we've got
former Chair
two.
Wynne Firth on behalf of the entire Architectural Review Board, the city planning staff, and the entire city.
Who have signed a card for you.
That you might remember us by your benches, Wynne.
Oh, this is horrible. Thank you very, very, very much.
And with that,
I
the
will
meet-
treasure this.
Any last words before we close the meeting?
Just be a little careful.
I'll be very careful. Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you.
So we really wanted to thank you for your dedication to the city. You know, you were here formerly as the city attorney and then now as a board member for 4 years at least. You know, we really appreciate your dedication to the city and especially, you know, your dedication to our ultimate modes of transportation as noted by the
Walking.
bench there. We appreciate that you have really, you know, ground that in our minds that that's definitely very important to accommodate pedestrians and bicycles and things of that nature. I have a whole laundry list of projects that you've been here for probably way too long. I think you were probably here for all maybe 10 hearings of the 429 University project.
But fortunately, I had a conflict. Well, actually, I was accused of bias, so I didn't participate.
That's true. You were on the board. That's true. You did have a conflict. But there's lots of public projects: the 101 pedestrian bridge, the Avenidas project, fire station, downtown garage, the public safety building. Many projects in the research park, in the shopping center. You were here for all of the wireless hearings, including the wireless standards, the comp plan EIR that we've done, both versions of Mercedes, and several downtown projects. So we just appreciate your help on all of those. As staff, we also have a plaque for you as well, commemorating your years on the board. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I mean, actually, the one that really left scars was SOFA 1 and 2, but I think the results were excellent. I've already thanked support staff earlier as they once again provided great food. I always feel we should share with an entire audience, but oh, how pretty. One nice thing about being thanked by design professionals is that they look really good. Thank you. And I mean, I did arrive here in 1998 and was assigned to the 5th floor staff as my principal responsibility, along with the famous underground utilities, water, gas, and wastewater. And it was an enormous education, an enormous privilege. It was fascinating to work in this town full of creative people who do interesting projects, who think both on a very tiny scale and a very large scale. It's an honor to work in a city where you think, gee, that's a serious problem. You go look it up on the website, and what do you know? We wrote a report. And we probably are implementing it too. It's great to work in a city where people show up at public hearings and tell you important and interesting things. And it's been most fun of all to work with my colleagues on the dais. It's to hang out with a bunch of really talented, funny, engaged architects has been great. So, not to mention superb planning staff, who will never, ever use the term verbiage to refer to text because they know to respect words as well as drawings. So thank you.
With that, the meeting is adjourned.
Oh, really quick question. Who's on subcommittee?
I believe I am, and Alex Liu.
Okay, just checking.
Not us.